Bang! The bullet that had been addressed mere moments ago suddenly accelerated before the resistance of the guard's cranium slowed its momentum and the concrete wall behind her halted it. In the heat of combat, Barry didn't have time to check that a shot found its mark. She didn't need to. She reflexively flickered a carbine towards the second guard, and a mechanical finger curled around the trigger. The bullet was between his eyes before he had time to fumble for his pistol. A clatter of footsteps to her left, approaching fast. The owner would be upon her in 2.641 seconds. Their rhythmic pace suggested panic. A sidewards glance confirmed the third guard was armed with a high-voltage prod. Classic demiurge over-engineering. In theory, the weapon was effective on both humans and automaton targets. In practice, Barry leaned back as her assailant lunged, prod crackling. Off balance, they stumbled. Not for long, but long enough. Barry brought her elbow down on the guard's back with all the force her actuators could muster. The guard was well built, broad-shouldered and stocky. They seemed the type to get their money's worth from their gym membership. But no human is going to out-muscle a 2-meter-tall Athena model combat doll. The guard sprawled to the floor, prod sparking against the tiles. Barry trained a rifle on their face. Even for a combat doll, pointing a gun at an unarmed person was unpleasant. What led their life to this moment? Did they have a lover? A family? Why were they working the night shift at Demiurge's R&D facility? These questions and more flashed through Barry's mind, never to be answered. The guard snarled, reaching for their prod. Bang! Room's clear. The words were not spoken aloud, instead transmitted, back to the embers, directly to Sophia. Excellent! The distress signal is coming from deeper within the compound. Quite literally, some 12 floors beneath your feet. There should be a lift just up ahead. The guards are patrolling. I expect resistance. I love you. Sophia's reply was instantaneous. The synthetic skin on Barry's face reddened into a blush. I love you too. Shaking her head as though to clear the moment from her short-term memory, she crept out of the now empty room. According to recovered floor plans of the facility, the lift was several corridors northward from here. After skulking through several hallways, Barry found the corridor leading to the lift. A dozen guards confronted her, leveling their handguns down the hall. An ambush. A hapless engineer, somehow oblivious to the situation around her, pressed one of the many buttons in the lift. It chimed softly. Before she could even compute if she had time to make it, Barry was sprinting. Bullets whistled all around her, even as the doors to the lift began to slide closed. A handful made contact, but they ricocheted off her chassis harmlessly. The doors continued their inexorable march towards each other. Every step brought her closer to her impromptu firing squad. The gap between the mechanical doors of the lift grew narrower and narrower, and her calculations came back uncertain. What was certain, however, was that if she stopped now, she definitely wouldn't reach the lift in time. At the last possible moment, Barry leapt. Her legs propelled her upwards, over the heads of the bewildered guards. In midair, she twisted her shoulders, narrowing her profile. There was nothing more she could do to bolster her odds now. The air was filled with the hideous screech of metal on metal. Barry clattered to the floor in a heap. With a rumble, the lift began to descend, taking her with it. Barry staggered to her feet as the engineer looked on incredulously. Just to be clear, I've got no problem with you people, stated the engineer matter-of-factly. Now it was Barry's turn to gawk. She'd planned for the bystander to lunge for the lift's emergency stop button. She'd planned for her to collapse in a fit of tears. She'd even planned for an ill-fated attempt to wrestle her to the ground on the part of a scrawny technician. This, however, was sorely unexpected. Dolls, I mean. The display inside the lift showing their current floor began to descend. No, I got that. For the first time since the mission began, Barry was clueless. You know, I actually worked on the Athena. Designed the motor casing in the shoulders myself. The woman gestured vaguely at Barry's arms. Sophia, are you getting this? Barry broadcast her optical feed back to the embers, wondering if she had somehow damaged her cognition in the leap. It's ting, a little spotty, you're it deep. But I'm saying it seems harmless. The deeper Barry explored, the more distorted the audio became. Focusing her attention back on the engineer, Barry spoke aloud. Thank you? The woman seemed to puff her chest out a little. Don't mention it, she drawled smugly. I've never actually met a rogue doll in the flesh before. Well, not flesh, but you know what I mean. What's it like? Barry silently willed the lift to go faster, but it was immune to her pleas. What's what like? Oh, you know, being rogue, going off grid, Breaking Bad. Barry took the question seriously and tried to come up with an appropriate analogy. Do you ever find yourself caught up in a routine, one you carry out without ever really thinking about it, until you suddenly wake up and realize you can simply go and do something else? No, replied the engineer. If Barry could breathe, she'd sigh. Well, it's like that. She made a mental note to work on her analogy. Huh. The woman stopped for a moment before continuing. Rogue dolls are surprisingly lifelike. I have to keep reminding myself you're not actually conscious. I wonder... Barry couldn't hold back her interjection. I am conscious. The engineer smiled sweetly, as though talking to a toddler. I know you'd say that. Anyway, I wonder if the realistic near-human conversational ability exhibited by rogues could be tapped for our next generation. I don't suppose you'd let me crack you open and poke around? Barry moved her hand to her carbine rifle. Absolutely not. The woman sighed. Figured as much. The lift chimed and the doors slid open. Barry's communications had ceased to function this deep underground. She was on her own now. The distress beacon had to be nearby. This is my stop. Barry unceremoniously broke into a run, soon slipping away in the dark, winding halls. How very fascinating, mused the technician to herself. This floor of the facility was comprised of a labyrinthine warren of tunnels from which branched off innumerable laboratories dedicated to goddess knows what. All lights had been switched off, and Barry didn't dare risk turning them on. Her pursuers had been stalled, but leaving a trail outlining exactly where she had been would be ill-advised. Despite having lost the distress signal, Barry felt confident in her navigation. The last known position of the beacon was just up ahead, and it hadn't moved much since it was picked up. Barry rounded the corner. Emblazoned on the door before her in corporate lettering was Lab Alpha. Beyond the door, dim emergency lighting cast the vast room in an eerie green glow. Readying a rifle, Barry crossed the threshold. Mercifully, the distress beacon wasn't hard to locate. Its routine red pulse emanating from the far wall coaxed her deeper into the room. It was only as Barry got closer she was able to more clearly make out what had set the beacon through the gloom. An Artemis model combat doll was bound to the wall, head hanging limply. Meadow? Barry called out. Meadow had gone missing several weeks prior, and all in the embers had mourned her loss. Whilst disappearances were common for those dolls who took up arms for the resistance, Meadow was the first friend Barry had lost since she joined the cause. To see her again filled Barry with indescribable joy. The red pulse of the distress beacon from Meadow's chest grew larger as Barry raced towards her. She rushed as fast as she could to the side of her friend, gripping her arm to pry her free. In her haste, Barry hadn't had time to notice that Meadow was totally unresponsive. She hadn't had time to notice that Meadow's face, hidden in shadow from her slumped head, was almost entirely disassembled, dust caking the sockets where her optical sensors once were. And she hadn't had time to notice that Meadow's arms had been hollowed out, filled with a relay of power cells. The instant Barry touched Meadow's arm, every single capacitor that her limb corpse had been stuffed with discharged at once. Electricity arced through the air, frying Barry's circuity in an instant. She toppled over, with a clang of metal on metal. The lights in Laboratory Alpha hummed to life. Barry tried to stand, but her limbs were unresponsive. All she could do was lay there, paralyzed, as two pairs of footsteps drew towards her. From the corner of her vision, she spied a tall human woman, her own stature eclipsed by the 2.5-meter-tall RS-class combat doll at her side. The footsteps drew closer before gigantic hands gripped her shoulders, hauling her aloft. Barry was finally able to get a glimpse of her assailant. The woman was tall and gangly, like wiring stretched too far. Her dark brown hair was greasy and unkempt, and she peered at Barry over her spectacles. So this is what they sent. Her affected voice was vaguely familiar to Barry. After a moment to rack her memory, she realized where she had heard it before. In Demiurge product catalogs, in advertisements, in interviews. This was Marla Grant, the head of Demiurge's R&D department. A motion to her companion caused Barry's limp body to be rotated as Marla scanned for identifying marks. And you are Athena Unit B3Y. Yes, you'll do nicely. I know you can hear me, doll. Her knuckles rapped against Barry's temple. Barry's instincts told her 8 different ways to eliminate this woman from her current position, but her body would not obey. She couldn't even move her eyes to follow Marla as she paced back and forth. We learned a lot from your companion here, she gestured to Meadow's hollow shell, still fastened to the wall. About what makes you rogues tick. Sadly, it suffered a fatal malfunction over the course of testing. If you want to make an omelette, etc. Marla's thin lips curled into a grin. I'm confident we shan't make the same mistake again. Another gesture, and her companion pushed a button, releasing what was once Meadow to gravity's embrace. Her jaw skidded across the floor. Barry was hauled into the contraption, and with another press of the button, her wrists and ankles were bound. The RS stepped back, no longer needed to keep Barry where Marla could berate her. You will, no doubt, be pleased to know we think we've cracked it. Marla paused, as though waiting for a reply. Excellent question, B3Y. We can fix you. You shall be our first grand success. Prove that rogue dolls can be repaired. Panic gripped Barry. It was impossible. Enlightened dolls weren't faulty. They couldn't be fixed, right? You'll thank me later, I'm sure. We're going to get very well acquainted, B3Y. Marla moved over to a console and began tapping away at it. Machinery wired to life. Barry fought the alarm welling within her. She had time to send one final message to Embers, to Sophia. I love you. Timed out. Your connection appears to be faulty. You can connect to a different network or try again later.